cities, and in particular like older buildings, abandoned buildings, just that general decay, it really speaks to like the passage of time and like human presence in an interesting way. That's always been something that's really inspiring to me, whether it's just going to these places to visit or actually going there to paint. With that angle of it, I mean, there's so many cool textures, and the way that you can kind of respond to the architecture of a space you're in, it opens up a whole bunch of new questions when you're making art. The way that you can experience the way that time passes, the way that nature overtakes civilization, just seeing all of these processes happen is really, really inspiring to me, and I think really cool. It's just a really interesting contrast to see man-made structures and materials returning to where they came from. Like, for me, it speaks a lot too about how like transitory things are, and just how fleeting everything about us as human beings is, our lives, the things that we create. It returns to the earth so quickly in the grand scheme of things. I think being able to actually physically see that happening with the space is something that's really, really appealing to me. I've been doing it a little bit less, but I used to work mainly on old wood. Like, I'd go out into these places, explore, and then take things home with me. And that kind of process still really informs what I'm doing. I think for me, I'm kind of interested in showing this intersection of like human forces and natural forces and how those kind of coincide. And part of that to me is like civilization as a natural force and how that conflicts and also grows with the world that we live in. Those are all kind of like big overarching concepts that sort of inform what I'm doing. Yeah, overall, I think my aesthetic is influenced a lot by the desert and a lot by sparseness and kind of emptiness, and finding things that are really rich and dynamic within that kind of environment. People, just the way that we're kind of brought up in our public education system, a lot of people don't feel like they are kind of entitled or allowed to have an opinion about art. Like, it's this mysterious kind of ivory tower world that the average person, their opinion is irrelevant, which is really not the case. But I've noticed that there's a certain kind of paradigm that exists when you're showing art in a gallery, and it's really hard to break out of that and to get average people who are not gallery goers, who are not art patrons, who are not collectors, to really talk about the way that art affects them and what their opinions are and what they're feeling when they're looking at a piece of work. Whereas with public art, I feel that because of the way that murals function in the public space, it's a lot easier for people to have a reaction to them and to be honest about the reaction and upfront and like communicate that to their friends and their family, or to strangers, or to the artists. And I found that that reaction is really honest and really raw, and I think is completely removed from the framework of the gallery world and the kind of academic context that art exists in for a lot of people. And even art that isn't necessarily academic, there is a certain specialized language that artists and the people who are interested in art speak, and so for the average person it's really hard to break into that world. And I think because we're surrounded by visual stimuli in public space, whether it's advertising, whether it's graffiti, whatever that is, when people see murals, they respond to it in a way that they don't feel like it. They feel like their opinion is valid. They feel like they can speak on it and what they think is meaningful. And of course, what people think of art is meaningful no matter where it is, but I've found a lot of people a lot more comfortable expressing that in public and in regards to public art. And that's a big part of why I do that, because I want to put art out into the world in a way that is available to everyone and is accessible to everyone and like creates a dialogue and garners some kind of reaction from them, whether they love it, whether they hate it, whether it gets them thinking about something completely different, or whether they are keyed into what I was thinking about when I was making the piece. I mean, there's a whole host of different reactions, and all of them are great. And I think that, to me, is one of the main reasons why I do art in public, is to key into that reaction, is to get that from people, and to get that from a much wider scope of people than I would just showing in the gallery. I think having color in the city, having text, having signs, graffiti, random tags, stickers, all of this visual stimuli, I think is so important because it's a reflection of our culture and who we are as people and our desire to leave a mark in the world. You know, granted, we're bombarded with advertising and a lot of it is really crappy, a lot of it is really it hits the lowest common denominator in terms of quality, in terms of content, but you know, that's advertising. There's a whole host of other visual stimuli that are very different, and I think with things like graffiti, with things like commissioned public art and everything that falls in between that, it's a really good antithesis to both these really highly controlled visual idioms that we're getting via advertising, and also just the kind of oppressiveness of blank walls. I don't know if I'm alone in this. I mean, I know like artists in general kind of feel this way. I don't know if there's a segment of the population that wants everything gray and boring and sterile, but I think having all of these things in a city or any other environment, it speaks to the life that is happening there. And if there's no visual record of that, if people aren't leaving their mark in some way, then it feels lifeless.